My name is David. I wasn't always a killer, but for a long time I believed I was born to be one, not of the body but of the soul. I was raised to tear down churches, to paralyze men of God in the middle of the night, to mock prayer and silence the voices that reached heaven. It all began in New Jersey. I was 16, angry at the world, and desperate to belong somewhere, anywhere. That's when I met a man who called himself Malik. He wasn't your average cult leader. He was charming, educated, and charismatic, but behind that smile was something much darker. He didn't ask me to believe in the devil. He asked me to believe in myself, to believe that light was a lie and darkness held the truth. It sounded crazy, until it didn't. Malik introduced me to a group called the Pathless Ones. They weren't goths playing with candles. They were real. Rituals at 3 a.m., blood oaths, spiritual bindings. They spoke in tongues I didn't recognize and summoned forces I couldn't see but felt. I saw things I can't unsee. People screaming in languages they never learned, shadows moving in places no one stood, fire that burned cold. And I was fascinated. My first task: crash a revival service at a Black Baptist church in Newark. I was told to bring silence to the voice leading them. I didn't know what that meant until I got there. I remember walking in and locking eyes with the pastor, Pastor Marcus. As he prayed over the crowd, my hands started to tingle. Not like nerves, like power. And when I whispered a chant Malik taught me, the pastor suddenly froze mid-sentence. His voice vanished. The room fell into chaos. That night I was celebrated. I was told I had a gift, and I wanted more. I spent the next 2 years traveling up and down the East Coast, Maryland, Georgia, even down to Texas. I didn't carry a weapon. I didn't need to. I had rituals, I had entities, I had control. One night, Malik gave me a new assignment. "There's a woman in Chicago," he said. "She prays from midnight to 3 a.m. every day. She's blocking our work in 5 cities. You'll find her, and you'll silence her." Her name was Grace, a street missionary. No big social media following, no fancy stage, just a middle-aged Latina woman who fed the homeless and prayed like her life depended on it. I thought she'd be easy, but when I stood across the street from her apartment building, I couldn't move. My feet were frozen. Someone was watching me. I tried again the next night, and the next. But every time I got close to her door, I'd hear it. A voice. Not in my head. Behind me. "She's covered. Leave now," I told Malik. He laughed. "Push harder. Break the hedge. If God won't stop you, nothing will." So I did. I broke into her building, waited until 2:57 a.m. and stepped into her apartment. But what I saw changed everything. The apartment was silent, no barking dogs, no creaking floors, just the ticking of an old wall clock and the faint sound of someone praying behind the bedroom door. I stepped inside slowly. The air was thick, not with fear, but with something else, like walking into the middle of a thunderstorm. Except everything was still. Grace was on her knees. Her Bible was open, her eyes closed, her hands lifted. She didn't even flinch when the door creaked behind me. "Father, thank you for protecting this building. Thank you for silencing every plan of darkness tonight." It made no sense. I should have attacked her right then. But my body wouldn't obey. I raised my hand to start the chant, but my lips trembled. My throat closed. It felt like something had gripped me by the chest. That's when she spoke again, but this time directly to me. "David, he told me you were coming." My knees almost gave out. She knew my name. We'd never met. "I don't know you," I muttered. "Shut up, you don't know anything about me." She didn't move, just kept her eyes closed. "I know the boy you used to be, and I know the demons you think are protecting you." That was it. I screamed and lunged toward her, chanting words Malik had drilled into me. But just before I touched her, I hit something invisible. It was like smashing into a wall of electricity. I flew backwards and hit the ground hard. My whole body shook. That's when I saw it. A man standing behind her, not glowing, not levitating, just standing. His eyes were like fire but filled with peace. He looked human, but eternal. Jesus. He didn't speak, just looked at me with eyes that saw every sin I'd ever committed, and still, he didn't look away. The shadows in the room began to scream, literally. I heard voices yelling inside my own head. Run! Kill her! Close your eyes! Don't look at him! But I couldn't move. I couldn't stop looking at him. Tears welled up in my eyes. I didn't know why. I felt naked, exposed, broken. He stepped toward me. Grace was still praying, but now she was weeping. Save him, Lord. Save what hell tried to claim. And then Jesus said one word, just one. Son. That shattered me. The demons inside me shrieked, my body convulsed, and I blacked out. I woke up hours later on the floor, alone. Grace was gone. But beside me, a handwritten note. He's not done with you yet. I stumbled out of Grace's building just before sunrise, soaking wet from sweat and half numb from what I had seen. The streets were quiet, but I heard echoes that weren't there. Every shadow made me jump. Every noise behind me felt like it had teeth. My ride was gone. I had to walk 7 blocks before I found a 24-hour diner and called Malik. He didn't pick up. When I finally got back to the safe house in Brooklyn, they were already waiting for me. Not with questions, with silence. 3 members of the cult stood around the black altar in the center of the living room. The candles were burning, but the flames were blue. Malek sat in the armchair, legs crossed, smiling. But it wasn't the usual smirk. It was disappointment, wrapped in rage. You didn't finish the job, he said calmly. Tell me why. I tried to explain that something stopped me, that I'd been blocked by a force stronger than anything we'd dealt with before. He interrupted. You saw him, didn't you? I couldn't speak. Malik stood, walked up to me, leaned close. You've seen the enemy now. That makes you dangerous. Before I could react, he pressed his palm against my chest and whispered a curse in a language I didn't recognize. My body jolted, like electricity surged through my spine. Then the room went dark. The other members began to chant. I was dragged to the center, laid on the floor. My wrists burned, my vision blurred. They weren't welcoming me back. They were punishing me. You were chosen, David, Malik hissed, and you defiled your gift. The devil demands payment. The next hour was a blur of pain and hallucinations. I saw fire licking the walls, snakes slithering from under the couch, my own reflection in a mirror, smiling while I screamed. Something entered me that night, not just spiritually. I felt it physically crawl into my mouth as I choked. And then I blacked out. I woke up in my own apartment, no idea how I got there. But something was off. The clock was frozen at 3:33 a.m. Every mirror in the apartment was cracked. My phone screen shattered. My Bible, the one Grace had slipped into my jacket pocket, was on the floor, burning, without smoke. The whispers started that night. Voices in the pipes, faces in the corner of my eyes, things moving in the dark when nothing should be moving. I had failed my mission. And now I realized hell had turned against me. I packed a duffel bag and left everything behind. Brooklyn, Malik, the cult, the cursed apartment. I didn't even lock the door. I just ran. My first thought was to go south. I'd been to North Carolina once, years ago. It felt quiet, remote. Maybe the shadows wouldn't follow me there. I bought a cheap bus ticket with cash and didn't tell a soul. No phone, no IDs. Just a hoodie and a prayer I wasn't ready to say out loud. But on the way there, I started to notice something strange. The same homeless man kept appearing at different stops, same torn beanie, same eyes. He never blinked, just stared. When I finally arrived in Asheville, I checked into a rundown motel with flickering lights and mildew on the curtains. It smelled like cigarettes and wet carpet, but it was far from the altar, and that was enough. Or so I thought. The first night, I dreamed of fire again. But this time, it wasn't hell. It was my childhood church, burning. I saw my younger self, maybe 7 years old, hiding under a pew while the choir screamed and smoke filled the sanctuary. A cross fell and hit the floor in front of me, upside down. I woke up gasping for air. My skin was ice cold. The air in the motel was heavy, and my ears rang with a low humming sound, like bees crawling under my skin. The Bible Grace had given me? It was on the nightstand, open and turned to Revelation. I hadn't touched it. I tried to ignore it, went for a walk the next day, bought a sandwich, fed the ducks by the lake, told myself I was just tired. But that night it got worse. I saw my mother, or something wearing her face. She stood at the foot of my bed with her head tilted, smiling. "You left us, David. You left me. You let the fire in." I screamed and threw a lamp, but there was nothing there, just broken glass, blood on my hand. I barely slept for the next 3 nights. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that burning church. But now, there were voices calling me from beneath the floorboards. On the 4th night, I gave up. I walked into a small diner off the highway, sat at the counter, and for the first time in years, I prayed. It wasn't eloquent, it wasn't long, just 5 broken words whispered into a coffee cup. "God, are you still there?" The waitress, an older black woman with tired eyes, stopped pouring. She stared at me for a second and said, "He's been waiting, baby. He never left." Oh, I didn't even ask her what she meant. I just broke down, crying. And for the first time, the voices went silent. 3 days after that encounter in the diner, I found myself walking aimlessly through the streets of Asheville. I had no plan, no direction. I just followed the sun. I wandered into a quiet neighborhood on the east side, where the houses looked older than time and kids played with sticks instead of phones. Something about it felt safe. There was a small white building at the end of the block. It wasn't fancy. No big signs, just a wooden cross and a banner that read, "Revival Thursday, all welcome." I wasn't looking for church. I just wanted silence. But I stepped inside anyway. The room was empty, except for 2 women setting up folding chairs and placing Bibles on them. One of them turned around, and my heart stopped. It was her, Grace. She smiled like she had been expecting me. "Took you long enough, David." I froze. My knees almost gave out. How are you here?" "Same reason you are," she said gently. "God doesn't lose track of his children." I wanted to run, to yell, to demand how she could call me that. After all the things I had done, all the people I had cursed, all the darkness I had embraced, but she didn't accuse, she invited. "You saw him, didn't you? That night, in my apartment?" I nodded slowly, my mouth dry, my eyes welling up again without permission. He called me son." She stepped closer, placed a hand on my shoulder. "That's because you always were. The devil never owned you, David. He just lied to you." That broke something deep inside me. I collapsed into one of the folding chairs and sobbed like a child. She knelt beside me. "Do you know why Jesus let you into that room? Why he didn't strike you down that night?" I shook my head. "Because he knew one day you'd come back." For the next hour, we sat alone in that little sanctuary. She told me her story, how she'd been praying for years for God to send someone unexpected to the ministry, not a preacher, not a deacon, a weapon once used by hell. Grace believed I was that weapon. "You've seen what few dare to see. Now you'll help others break free." I told her I didn't know how, that the darkness was still inside me, that I was afraid of what I might become again. She smiled. "Then let's start by renouncing it. Tonight." We waited until the sun went down. Grace said the darkness made things bolder, but also made God's power clearer. I didn't know what that meant until that night. She locked the church doors, turned off the lights, lit a single candle. "No distractions," she whispered. "Only the truth will speak now." We sat in the front pew. She handed me a worn Bible with stains on the cover and marked verses inside. "Say what I say, but mean it. If you fake this, it will break you." I nodded, barely breathing. She began, "I renounce every covenant I made with darkness." I repeated the words. My lips trembled, my hands started to sweat. "I break every tie to demonic spirits, to blood oaths, to curses spoken and received." That's when the temperature in the room dropped. I saw my breath. In July, I kept repeating her words, my voice growing hoarse, my heart pounding. "I choose Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. I surrender everything." Suddenly, a scream burst out of my own mouth. But it wasn't me. My back arched, my vision blurred. I saw a face in front of me, my own reflection in a cracked mirror across the sanctuary, twisted, demonic with black eyes. Grace placed her hand on my chest and began to pray in tongues. The pew shook. Something inside me started clawing at my ribs, trying to crawl out or drag me under. I fell to the floor, convulsing, growling. I heard a voice, not Grace's, not mine. "He is mine. He made blood covenant. You cannot take him." Grace didn't flinch. "The blood of Jesus breaks every pact. You have no legal right. Get out." The lights exploded, literally. Every bulb shattered at once. The candle went out, and then the shadow appeared. A tall, horned figure stood at the back of the sanctuary. No face, just smoke and malice. My body felt crushed under its gaze. It stepped forward. Grace screamed at the top of her lungs, "Jesus, cover him!" In that instant, a burst of light erupted from the cross on the altar. The figure shrieked like a dying animal, collapsing in on itself. The church shook, my ears rang, then everything went still. I opened my eyes, lying on the floor, gasping for air, soaked in sweat. Grace was beside me, her arms around me like a mother cradling a child. "It's done," she whispered. "You're free." But deep inside, I felt something else. A war had ended, but a scar remained. The morning after the deliverance, the world looked different, brighter, almost fake, like everything had been painted fresh overnight. But inside, I was still cracked. I spent the first few days helping around the church, cleaning, folding chairs, taking out trash. Grace never asked me to. I just needed to do something that wasn't evil. I didn't tell anyone who I had been. One night, during a small group meeting, a woman shared that her teenage son had been getting involved with tarot cards and crystals. She cried, afraid he'd be touched by darkness. I sat in silence. If only she knew what I'd done. Later, I asked Grace, "What if I'm not supposed to be around people like that? What if I'm just pretending to be clean?" She looked at me with that same unshakable peace. "You're not pretending, you're healing." But healing hurt. At night, I still had dreams, not of demons, not anymore. Now I dreamed of the faces of the people I had cursed, the pastors I attacked, the women who screamed as shadows choked them in their sleep because of me. I started skipping meals, skipping prayer, sitting alone by the church steps until sunrise. I thought maybe I didn't deserve peace. Then one evening, something happened. A man named Elijah visited the church, a former gang member turned street preacher. His arms were covered in tattoos. His voice was gravel and thunder. He stood at the front and shouted, "Don't you dare let your past tell you who you are in Christ." Everyone clapped, but I froze. After the service, he walked right up to me. "Your eyes, you've seen hell, haven't you?" I nodded slowly, stunned. He smiled. "Good, then you're ready to bring people out of it." Those words broke something in me. Again. Later that night, I stood in front of the same cracked mirror where I once saw that twisted reflection. I looked myself in the eyes, and for the first time, I didn't see a servant of darkness. I saw a survivor. It was a Thursday night revival meeting. The church was full. Not packed, but enough people to make the room feel alive. Young couples, mothers, ex-cons, elders with shaking hands. Grace had told me earlier that day, "If you're ready, tonight is the night." I wasn't sure I was, but I said yes anyway. I sat on the front row while the worship team played. The songs were sweet, gentle, nothing intense, but I couldn't stop shaking. When Pastor Elijah called me up, I felt like I was walking through water. I stood at the pulpit, hands gripping the edges. I couldn't even look at their faces at first. Then I said, "My name is David, and I was a Satanist." A gasp rippled through the room. A woman in the third row covered her mouth. A man shifted uncomfortably. I took a breath. I was part of a cult. I cursed pastors. I called demons into people's homes. I was assigned to destroy a missionary named Grace. And I failed because Jesus showed up. Silence. Then someone in the back whispered, "Jesus." I continued, voice stronger now. I told them about the rituals, about the night of the attack, about how the devil himself had tried to mark me, and about how I was now free. But just as I finished the last sentence, a man in the audience screamed. He stood up, shaking, frothing at the mouth. His eyes rolled back. People screamed. A child cried. Chairs scraped the floor. The man growled, "He still belongs to us!" Pastor Elijah and Grace ran to him. They began to pray, laying hands. The man fought like a wild animal, until finally he collapsed, limp, silent. And then something extraordinary happened. One by one, people began to stand. Some were crying, some came forward. One woman knelt at the altar and shouted, "I was in witchcraft, I want out." Another man fell to his knees and confessed he'd been tormented at night, hearing voices in his head. What was supposed to be a simple testimony became a mass deliverance service. Demons were cast out, people were healed, chains were broken, all because one former enemy of God had the courage to tell the truth. I wept, and for the first time I didn't weep out of guilt. I wept because I knew I had been chosen for this. That night after the service, I slept deeper than I had in years, but peace didn't last. In the dream, I was back in Brooklyn, in that cold apartment where it all began. The windows were blacked out, the floor covered in salt circles, the air thick with sulfur. Malek stood in the center of the room, just as I remembered, tall, elegant, terrifying. His eyes glowed like coals. "You embarrassed me, David," he said calmly. "You were supposed to rise in the ranks. Now look at you, weeping in churches like a broken child." I couldn't speak. My throat was sealed shut in the dream. He stepped closer, smiling. "You think you're free? You forget the night of your initiation, the blood that sealed it. That's not something your Jesus can erase." My body trembled. Shadows began to move across the walls. Familiar whispers filled the air, voices of spirits I once invoked. They circled me. Malik raised a dagger. "There's only one way out. Come back, or you die tonight in your sleep." The walls pulsed. The air grew colder. I felt my chest tighten, a real pressure, not just a dream. But then, a wind rushed through the apartment, not cold, but holy. The shadows screamed. The dagger in Malik's hand melted like wax. His confident grin vanished. He turned his head slowly and then fell to his knees. Behind him stood a man in white, eyes like fire, face like lightning, hands like mercy and judgment at once. Jesus. He didn't speak at first, he just looked at me, and every weight I had ever carried lifted off my soul in a single second. Then he said, "This one is mine." With a wave of his hand, the entire apartment cracked like glass. The floor split open, revealing a black pit beneath. The shadows fled into it, shrieking. Malik tried to stand, but was held in place by chains of light. Jesus turned to me again. You were not chosen by darkness. You were stolen, but now you are redeemed. He reached out his hand. As soon as I touched it, I woke up. My pillow was soaked in tears, my heart racing, my hands glowing warm. I knew that was no ordinary dream. It was a visitation, and Malik would never come back again. It's been 3 years since I walked out of the darkness. I've never gone back. After the dream, I knew I had a mission, not just to survive, to speak, to rescue, to break chains with the same hands that once bound others. Grace helped me get started. She introduced me to churches, youth groups, even prison ministries. At first, people were skeptical. Some pastors refused to let me speak. We don't want that kind of testimony here, they said, but others welcomed me. And the ones who did saw things they couldn't explain. In the men's prison in Ohio, I shared my story with 120 inmates. One of them, covered in satanic tattoos, wept and gave his life to Jesus right there in the gym. In a halfway house in Florida, a woman who had tried to hang herself the night before told me, "You were the reason I didn't go through with it. Something told me to wait one more day." In a suburban church in Kansas, a teenage boy confessed to killing animals in ritual sacrifice because he had been recruited online. Now he's studying theology. I don't preach pretty sermons. I tell the truth. I tell them about the blood rituals, the pain, the false promises, the nights I cursed God and felt powerful but empty. And then I tell them about the one night everything changed, when a missionary named Grace refused to be afraid. I talk about the demon that tried to kill me and the Savior who stood in its way. I've seen hundreds come to Jesus through my testimony, not because I'm special, but because I'm proof that no one is too far gone. People always ask me, do you still feel haunted? Sometimes I do, but now, when the shadows come, I remind them of something. I don't belong to the dark anymore. My name is David. I was once a weapon of hell, but now I'm a warrior for the kingdom of God.